Hi, thank you. Thanks for coming out tonight. It's really gorgeous outside, so I really appreciate that you took the time to come in here and learn about DAM. My name's Lauren Filson. As Jeremy mentioned, I am his colleague at the Rockefeller Foundation, currently working on an implementation project there. A little bit of my background. And the background about this presentation is that previously I worked for an e-commerce website called Gilt.com, did a ground-up digital asset management project with them, even before we had a platform or a vendor, really working through workflows and the operations of how a company like that is going to manage their media. The Rockefeller Foundation is a much different ballgame because we're going to be introducing knowledge and documents as well. So a lot of this presentation is geared, speaking with media in mind, but generally is applicable to any type of asset that you want to consider. Essential DAM is a framework that I developed for the Henry Stewart Conference Series and gave this presentation for the first time in May. Henry Stewart has 4 global conferences each year. I believe the next one is in Chicago in September. There's one in Los Angeles where this will be presented again in November. And you can look forward to them coming back to New York next May. I'll put my Twitter handle up later, but if you follow me on Twitter, if that is something that you feel would be beneficial for you or for your organization, by having a friend that's speaking or associated with, you can get some discounts to get in for the conference passes, so just keep an eye open for that. I'll be sure to post it. All right? Great. So, the framework. I'm sure, and the text is a little small here, so you might have to squint, but I'm sure you guys can identify somewhere within this web of mess that you're sitting and struggling with your media assets. Now, I like to get to know my audience a little bit before I delve into this. How many folks are currently using a digital asset management platform? Okay. How many are actively in a discovery or selection process? Okay, great. How many are just really starting to get their feet wet and learn about DAM and really understand where to start with moving forward with that implementation? Perfect, great. This is going to be for you guys. The framework is derived from 2 models. The first model that we're going to walk through is this web, kind of breaking things down into digestible areas. As a DAM project lead, you touch a lot of different parts of your organization from an operational standpoint, from a legal standpoint. We'll touch into all of those in just a moment. The second part of the framework is derived from a model, which is actually a tactical outline, a checklist that you can go through, and they'll be available to you online after this presentation. You can feel free to download it, use it for your own knowledge, however you want to use it. Basically, it gives you a bare bones sort of outline structure to approach a project. So what the framework is about is really taking the 2 areas of understanding the parts of your business alongside that outline and how to really kind of get the ball rolling and start talking to people and speak to them in a way that is relevant to what they're experiencing within this web. Because DAM overall is maybe not going to be relevant to each member in your organization as a whole. And quite frankly, it can be overwhelming to some. So really understanding your talking points, your pivot points, and working through that checklist is where we're going with this today. So these are the 4 main areas that we're going to cover. DAM is a business application, the IT and systems integration portion, financials, and what I think is most important, change management and user adoption. So business application, really we're talking about things like your process. You know, where are these assets coming from? What's the acquisition like? How are they being created? What's the organizational structure that you're using in storage today? What's relevant now? What needs to be relevant for the future? And then obviously workflows. Minimizing redundancy is a huge one. How many times do you have to search and search for the same image? And you start counting those minutes and those hours, and they really add up over the course of time. Financials, right in hand with that. What are your efficiency gains? How can you start looking at what those tasks are that are very challenging without a DAM? And how do you start to measure? How can you take what you have today and establish some sort of metrics or goals that you know that once a dam is in place, or once you're going through your selection process and need to justify a budget to somebody, what are those key metrics that you're going to be able to compare against in the future? And from here, obviously, your user base and your licensing allocation. Every vendor is different. Many different pricing models to work from, many different hosting plans to work from, really kind of taking into account who needs to have access to these, how much access do they need to have, what's the impact on their efficiency, and moving forward from that, how do you kind of phase this out? Because in reality, it's a heavy bill to foot to put a dam in, and if you can show incremental growth in regards to your user interaction and the metrics and goals you've lined out, then you're going to make a very good case for additional funding for the project to really expand and optimize in the future. IT and systems integration. This is the project management side of things. This is the planning that's involved. This is how your metadata is going to be managed. Do you have other platforms that you can tap into to automate some of the metadata entry for you? You know, taking into account that that is a labor cost and that accuracy is really key. So there's also the concept of your communication plans and how you are pacing and rolling out the understanding from a project management perspective. We won't get too deep into technical things tonight as far as IT, like the hosting, the architecture, things like that. But if you guys have any questions after this presentation that you maybe want to ping to me, I'm more than happy to point you in the right direction afterward. Finally, adoption. Goes back into your business process. How are things changing for the rest of your staff? You know, and this really, if you want to get technical about it, or you want to get like into the weeds about it, it does come down to the number of clicks that it takes somebody to accomplish what they need to do. So really understanding what the process is for your staff members, for your users to be able to access your assets and how they're going to repurpose, how they're going to use. You need to think about technical support, tying back into the IT. What type of questions can you proactively sort of address through trainings, through resources and knowledge materials that are associated with your dam? Who's going to answer the questions that come up later? These might be simple questions like, well, I can't log into the system. Or they may be more, my favorite, the existential questions like, well, what if we have this thing now? We're seeing the value of having this information and these assets unlocked and available. We can really gather a lot more from it at that point. Those are the more fun conversations to have, and they happen right after your implementation. Training curriculums, we'll touch through a little bit. Obviously the change management, how's this talked about, how's this handled, and again, the communication plans as tied with the pacing of your project. So, in the link that will be provided in just a second, you'll have this PDF. You also have a PDF of the presentation as well for your access. This is the Essential Dam Implementation Project Guide. The tactical implementation checklist, the outline, is the meat and the bones of this document. But it takes you through these 5 different areas: discovery and selection, deployment, integration, adoption, and then finally maintenance and handoff. This is not going to be relevant to every single organization, but it is a good start for being able to have the conversations you need to have with the decision makers. Within each of these areas, it's broken down between assessments, actions, and deliverables. This is really where you're getting the survey. You're taking steps forward. And this is something that at the end of the day, you can hand off to the head of your digital department, head of your marketing department. Your CFO is a great person to give these things to, keeping in mind that you're trying to target the information that you're gathering in a very specific way to achieve the goals that you want. So, in addition, there's a mini project management tool guide. There are a lot of really robust, very expensive project management tools out there. Visio, for example, would be one. Some organizations have it, some don't. There are several free or low-cost resources online in terms of workflow mapping, creating a Gantt chart, which is going to move you through the phasing process or the project planning. There are a few of those outlined here, and really any way to just kind of minimize the level of effort and work that needs to go in front forward on being a project lead, all the better. I've also provided a sample vendor evaluation report just to give you guys a sense of what types of things you may consider and how to best present what's going to, it really is going to be a massive knowledge that you're going to get from your vendor. So a really excellent, concise way of formatting. The content of that is going to vary greatly between every organization as well, but at least it's a good starting point. There are 2 interactive templates. The metadata schema is an example of a broadcast and e-commerce metadata schema coming from the private sector. I don't have a public sector one yet, so I apologize in advance, but you really will get the same drift. What it does is it walks you through what your fields are, where the entry is coming from, how you're going to get it, what's the impact. So feel free to use those and apply them to your own organization. And then finally, an ROI calculator, where it gets you down to counting some hours and plugging in figures and understanding where your return on investment is going to hit immediately, and then over the course of vesting for about 4 years, I think it goes up to. So feel free to use those. Okay, those are the other things. Everything here is available at bit.ly, and I like this one, Miwalu. It's very easy. So you can access other information about DAM on my website. You can follow me on Twitter. I'll leave this up for just a second for you guys to get it jotted down. So. All right, great. So, business application. Understanding DAM's place in the organization, mostly focused around workflows and processes. This is really your starting foray. It's really getting to know where your media is, where your assets are, how they're being used, how your staff is using them, not using them, and finding potential for opportunity. Defining your digital assets and volume growth needs. Really taking a very holistic survey. Where are things living? They're not just on your server. They're in people's inboxes. They're in Dropbox accounts. They're scattered all about the web. There's also the concept of redundancy with assets. How many times do you save assets over and over and over in a different version, a different directory? So my advice in this realm is really getting a sense of exactly what type of file formats do you have? How many of them do you have? What is the physical space that is being occupied for those? Why, if assets aren't being saved on a server and instead are being saved on a desktop or an external hard drive somewhere, what's impacting your user that's preventing them from being able to use the processes that are established or already in place? By really getting a little bit deeper into that and understanding where redundancy comes from, there are a couple ways to go about this type of an inventory. You could do a scan of a server, and you could say, oh, we have 100,000 assets, it's this many gigabytes, this is what we need to think about. If you really take a deeper look and understand how your staff is working with it, you may get a better sense that it might only be 30,000 assets that are really important, and everything else just kind of needs to live in its own place, not move forward, really making that critical assessment and then projecting your volume and growth needs based on what you found. Mapping your current business processes, your workflows, your staff touch points, and all of their existing tools. Existing tools are things you may have never known about, and this is a great place to start conversation with your staff and start basically developing your relationships with them as business partners. It's a big change for some organizations. So understanding if somebody has taken the liberty to implement their own practice or put a tool in place. So a great example would be, well, I just organize everything in my Dropbox account because I can access that at home and I can't access our servers at home. Those types of exposures will help you define your requirements list as you go through a selection process. Taking the workflows that you're discovering and actually being able to map out a proposed streamlining. And it could be kind of a cluster of access, but you need approvals put in place. How is that going to be managed? Who are your users that are going to be conducting the approvals? And then ultimately, identifying quick wins and long-term opportunities. If you know that it's taking somebody many, many more times to access a file, access a document, or repurpose it correctly, and you can solve that immediately, those are your case in point. Hit those first. Always keep in mind your long-term strategy, the overarching goal of why you're going into this in the first place. But you'll be really surprised as you start to have these conversations and you start to garner trust with the rest of your staff, what you're going to discover in terms of file management. So here's just an example, marketing workflow, several steps of approvals. I made this with Lucidchart, which is in the project guide. I believe it's free up to so many objects per document, and then it's a very nominal annual fee afterward. These are great visuals. They're great for you to get a sense of what's happening. They're great for you to share with somebody because the conversations you have may be a little bit deep, they may be a little in the weeds, they may be a little too in-depth. Handing a decision maker a document like this is very clear. It's also very clear when it goes from a very confusing chart to a very clean chart as well. You can also leverage it as a guide later down the road for where do you optimize next. You're identifying the quick wins. You know what needs to happen from day one. Some things are by nature going to fall to the wayside. This is your reference guide for that. We've already mentioned a little bit about your inventory of digital assets and thinking about how that fits into your workflow as well. And this is also where you're establishing those key metrics. How much time things take, how are we tracking this? How do we understand that it may take a long time for somebody to properly use an asset, but when a system is in place, perhaps they have to put a little bit more effort or elbow grease into things like tagging going forward to make sure that those assets are properly leveraged later. All right. So, you've got your business analysis underway, you've got a good plan, you're feeling like the requirements are there, they're in place, they're outlined for you. How in the world are you going to get somebody to fork over several $1,000s for what can be perceived as a folder organization structure on a server? So again, capturing those current practices, they have to be measurable. They have to come down to time. They have to come down to man hours, dollars. That's your proof in the pudding. It justifies your budget. But solidifying your soft benefits. These are things like, if I knew that this existed, or if we had this, we could do Y, okay? If I had X, we could do Y. They're the things you can't quantify, you can't calculate. These are your most compelling stories, and Jeremy is a big storytelling advocate over here. Numbers only mean so much to certain people. The story's about the potential that can be unlocked, and potential and knowledge will be unlocked whenever a proper system is put in place. It's really kind of it's your gold. It's the way that you talk to people about it. It's how you can relate to them whenever you are going through the change management portion, when you're going through the change of putting a platform like this in place. Translating the improvements over time. So this is considering your volume, your growth, and exactly, where are you recuperating the initial costs up front, and how are you funding things for the future as well? And then, very importantly, risk. Risk is a huge factor. It's very unique and dependent based on the organization. It's very unique and dependent on each vendor that you're considering. Really taking into account simple things like, is it more important that we have a slick user interface, or is it more important that we have this really hardcore sort of engine indexing the assets for us? And what are the risks involved in that particular case with the user adoption? Will your user understand that it's really about what's under the hood as opposed to the body of the car? Your building blocks. These are the nuts and bolts. This is mostly what the tactical outline is delivering. Licensing needs. Not every user needs to have all access. What are their permissions? What's the cost associated with that? There are different licensing models available, as mentioned: single user, all-encompassing, concurrent licensing, subscription-based, all very, very different in terms of your long-term goals. Constructing your metadata schemas. You know what you want to tag, you know what you want to find. Getting that information in there is probably the most challenging part of it. Simple misspellings or errors on the input can really derail a project overall, and it can cause a need for long-term maintenance, which becomes labor, which becomes a cost. So really understanding what is it that we need from day one, what is our most desired end state, and working through it incrementally from there. Planning, pacing, project managing. Can't build Rome in a day. The project at Gilt.com took me well over a year and a half, probably closer to 2 years, from starting the discovery process to actually getting a system fully functioning in place with about 50% of the organization onboarded. Everything after that was considered the icing on the cake when we could start rolling it out to other departments that weren't part of the original plan. At Rockefeller, it's definitely probably about the same amount of time, completely different format, level of assets. Just expecting that you're taking these increments, giving yourself the milestones, and using tools, Asana, Trello for project management organization. You guys probably already know about that and use it for task management in day-to-day life. And shortcuts. If you receive an email that has an invoice, wouldn't it be great if that was automatically being logged in a spreadsheet or a Google Doc somewhere for you and you don't have to enter it? IFT works with several different mobile application platforms. You create formulas, and it basically automates menial tasks in your day-to-day. It's going to make your life a lot easier. I definitely encourage looking into it. It's in the project guide. Automations and integrations. At a whole level, you're talking about something like an product inventory management system is an example of an integration. So less relevant for this audience, but just as that example would be if I have images of products and I have all this information, SKUs, sizes, colors, style names, things like that I want to be added to an image of that particular product. I know that I have a database somewhere that houses all of it. How do I put those two together? Here, it could be something like a database that's managing contracts. Perhaps you have media contracts, photographer contracts. How do you start to extract that information? And then finally, your acceptance testing and anticipating issues. Once you've gotten to the point where you found your vendor, you're feeling good about it, you know what your requirements are, having a very clear checklist of what are we hitting, what can we test, can we have a proof of concept before we even put the money down for this, where we know that we're hitting at least a certain percentage of these items. And if the product or the behavior is not as you anticipated, what are the potential issues and the questions that could come out as a result from that?
Lauren.
Yes?
Can I ask, before going on, just maybe to back up for a second?
Sure.
So for those of you in the audience who don't necessarily even know if they need a dam, could you maybe go over like what is a dam even for those who don't know what it is, why you would need one, how you know you need one, what you put in it, just kind of a little bit more of the basics before we go even any further, so that for some people who don't know that they need one, maybe they do and they don't even know it.
Okay.
So could you just go over some of those basics?
Sure,
maybe?
absolutely. So, digital asset management. At the core could be your server and the file organization process that you're putting into it. Could be the way that you know your staff is accessing the assets, pulling them out, repurposing them, filing them away from whenever they perhaps can no longer be used, okay? So at a core, what a DAM is essentially a database and a platform that allows you to take those assets and add metadata to them, tagging. So as opposed to having to always categorize an asset under one folder or one folder structure, for example, say I went to the beach and I took a bunch of images at some event I went to at the beach, but later I need an image of the beach that's completely unrelated to that event. How do I know to look under that event to be able to find an image of the beach? You're going to tag that image as beach, you organize it in the proper place, file it in the proper place, but you know that these are more malleable and they're able to be accessed in a much different light. Other considerations with that are the rights around images. Definitely, media is very expensive and there are costs associated with it. There are certain limitations around how media can and cannot be used. And in our industry, quite frequently, media gets put in places that probably shouldn't technically and legally go. A DAM can help you associate what those rights are with an image. It can help you lock it down to certain people that actually know whether or not you should be able to use it. So those are a couple of the very high-level components of DAM. I was going to wait for questions till the end, so as to not get in the weeds. Is there anything that I can answer or clarify at this point? Anyone completely lost? Yes?
So when you're talking about your input template, that's where you would sort of have tagging options, is that?
Exactly. So you imagine that your tags are associated with fields. So what is our location? What is the topic that this image addresses? Then there's general keywording. So coming up with a metadata schema is something as simple as just being able to put general keywords on an image, or being able to get very, very specific about where it came from, why, and how, and capturing that information in there. It really comes down to how you need to access that later. So if we're organizing photos by event or a documentary image or an editorial image, something that's appropriate for web, something that's appropriate for print, providing different fields associated with those parameters allows your staff to be able to drill down better into what's actually usable for them. Does that make sense? Okay. Yes.
And digital asset management systems, can it be, is it more than just photos? Is it photos and videos? Is it photos, videos, and documents? Is it kind of any of those things that you want to?
By a traditional definition, it usually leans toward media, but it really can be any type of asset, any type of file. So that will occasionally vary between the different vendors that you're selecting. So really just getting a clear understanding of what file formats they support. A good example of that would be if you want to store documents in your DAM and you want to be able to preview a Word document without actually downloading it and opening it up, ask your vendor, whenever you display a Word document, do you see that preview or do you just see the Word icon? You know, different systems may be more geared toward media and they choose to only display the Word icon. So though you could technically store a document in that particular DAM and be able to access it and tag it later, it may not be useful if you can't have that preview. All right, great. Any other questions? All right. So this is your rollout. And these are just things to consider if you do have a DAM, if you're putting one in place. How it potentially could disrupt the day-to-day working of a staff member. How are you going to get all of your files into the DAM, and how are you going to tag them initially? What are the expectations with that? If you're considering integrations, what are the timelines for those? Who's supporting this? You know, a lot of time a DAM project lead carries a lot of knowledge in a lot of different overarching areas because you have to kind of get up above everything else and get an eagle eye view. And different departments function in different ways. What's relevant over here may not be relevant over here. So understanding how can you work with your staff to be able to support you as a TAM project lead, so you're distributing some of that work around in an organic way. The acceptance testing, the example of the acceptance testing would be the previews of the documents versus just seeing an icon. That's something that may be on your acceptance checklist, and what your quick win scenarios are. Where are you making somebody's life much, much easier from day one by putting a system in place. And then finally, getting everyone on board. You have the system, you give people a login, you give it to them, how they know how to use it, what's the best way, how do you get them really excited about it, and how do you make sure that everybody is being properly represented during your decision-making processes. So definitely making sure that you have a good, solid group of stakeholders. Very common sense. Your stakeholders are likely going to be your upper level management and more of your decision makers. They're going to understand how their team works and they're going to be able to pull the levers for you. Ambassadors, on the other hand, are once you reach a certain point, and they're your power users. They're the people who are really going to kind of get in there, understand the nuts and bolts of digital asset management, and they're the ones that you want to use, A, to find other opportunities for a system through their experiences, and then B, for them to actually disseminate knowledge to their colleagues and peers. Again, not coming back just on the project lead, but being a more of a village type of system. Your communication plans, really getting a lot of excitement about it. I generally advise a top-down messaging. If you can get somebody who's C-level or at a vice president level to stand by your side and say this is what it is, especially if you're going to experience some disruption to day-to-day by these changes. Having that support really will make the change management process go much smoother. Training approaches, do you do it in mass? How big is your organization? How many users are you rolling out to at first? Or do you want to do a train-to-trainer model where you're equipping a few people to be your superstars and allowing them to really work one-on-one in a contextual way with the rest of their users. Gathering and acting on feedback goes hand in hand with your metrics. Surveys are a great way to accomplish this. Anonymous, if you can, is always better. You'll get the most honest answers. People are not always going to be 100% happy about everything, and so this is where you can start to identify where you're trending up and you know you're hitting your accomplishments and you're hitting your goals, and where you're trending down perhaps and finding something that maybe needs to be addressed. And then tying that with actual functions that were within your metrics, that were within your ROI, is a good way to get a gauge and make sure that you're on track with your ultimate goals. Google Forms, WebMonkey, Survey, all great platforms for that. So, last slide of the presentation really are collaborative exercises. In the original context of the presentation, this would be the time that people were breaking off in groups and having drinks and stuff. For sake of time tonight and for networking, we're not going to do this, but because you have access to the presentation, I really advise sit down with a couple of your teammates, sit down with the people that you're working with day to day, and tackle an exercise from each of the 4 areas that we just covered. That's all. Yes?
Can you talk a little bit about the products that are major players in this world?
Wow. So that's a very good question. When I first started getting involved with DAM in late 2012, early 2013, there were probably 20 or 30 contenders on the market. Today, you're looking upwards of like 300. So it's a space that people are definitely understanding is a mainstay and a hold and something that's very necessary as we're more and more digital going forward. Some of your major players, you may hear of OpenText, was technically the first dam. It was a company called Artesia. They are the ones who invented this concept and created this concept and built a platform. And they worked with Yahoo whenever Yahoo came about. So they've been around for a really long time. You may encounter them. But there are other, other alternatives. Resource Space is actually open source dam. So if you have some developers handy, or you would rather put your dollars into development as opposed to purchasing the product itself, Resource Space would be another good one to look at as well.
I have a question of scale. I usually work with small nonprofits, and it seems like something like this, if it can be brought in initially, as opposed to when the floodwaters are rising, but given that resources are scarce and staff is small, do you have a recommendation for a product that is good for a smaller size nonprofit that can be brought in more gently and again with those challenges?
Sure. A favorite of Jeremy over here is actually Flickr. Flickr's a dam. If you have Photoshop Bridge, are you guys familiar with that at all? It's the kind of the file management view of everything through Adobe. That has tagging available in it too. So also has something that's called collections, where you can place documents under different collections regardless of where they're physically stored. So those would be a very good place to start. I would recommend Adobe simply because if you're going to start tagging those assets through Adobe, when you enter your keywords or your tags or your information there, it's in a schema that's called IPTC, and that's your standard format. So if you're entering metadata through Bridge, whenever you take your asset and you put it in another dam down the line, that data is traveling with it. So if you go with something like Flickr, you may be tagging, but it's living in the website as a layer over the image, and it's not actually embedded directly inside.
We just implemented a dam. There's only 3 of us on our communications team, and we use Smart Image. It's a low-end product of a much larger dam that costs like $10,000. But Smart Image is only like between $60 and $100 a month, depending on how much storage you need. It is mainly just for photos, though. You can host YouTube videos on it and tag those YouTube videos so they're searchable. I'm not sure if it can hold documents, but I think we have 2 terabytes of storage, and we're paying like $60 a month. You have different collections and different rights, so that if certain colleagues, you don't want them accessing things, they don't have to, and different sizes, so you can have web-friendly versions of things and the full-size version of things if you want to print them. And so I would take a look at it. It's relatively new, so the customer service isn't that great, but it's definitely a product that, and we have about maybe 8,000 photos, 7,000, so it's not like an organization like you all who maybe has 100,000. I don't know how many photos you have, but I guess that was another question I had, is like, when do you know that you need a dam, and how do you know that, like, okay, Google Drive is no longer enough for me in my organization? Like, I think some people here may not even know, like, the very basics. Like, what do they need to know to even start looking for a dam?
Sure. I would say a good time to say that you need a dam is 2 things. If you find yourself struggling looking for images more than doing your actual work, that's a good indicator. So if you're spending more time on the administrative aspects of dealing with assets, it's an excellent time to step into it. The second time, oh my goodness, it just escaped me. It'll come back. It'll come back. That's really your big indicator that you need a dam. So, yes.
I deal with a lot of photo releases and have a lot of photo shoots within my organization. And, I have like thousands of these releases. And I'm just wondering, do these dams, do the photo releases integrate these products? I mean, I'm trying to figure out the dam part and also how to manage that piece of the process so that people aren't taking photos or putting photos in that there aren't releases for, and then how do you trace them back?
great question. Before I answer you, I did remember my second part is if the burden of images is coming down on just one or two people as well. Really, everybody should be able to have the appropriate level of access. For your question, a lot of dams are really well equipped to be able to associate release forms. A lot of them will have what's called a parent-child relationship, where you can say that this is my image, and these are all of the releases that have been associated with it in the past. Or vice versa, if you have a full shoot and you had a contract with somebody, then maybe your release is your parent, and all of the different assets that are associated with that release are the children of it. So a lot of dams have that functionality built in out of the box. All you have to do is point one another, and that will be a starting point for your staff to know, at least, do we have a release for this? Then you want to get a little bit more sophisticated. A lot of them have built in what's called digital rights management, where you can actually enter the dates of your releases and it will expire the assets for you. It may be a watermark that says you can't use it anymore, but it's still visible, it's still findable if you want to renew a release or renew the usage on it. Or it may be hidden completely from certain users based on whatever level of permission that you're giving them. So.
Are there any smart systems out there that, because it seems like one of the obstacles in doing this would be the time it would take to tag all these images in the file. So are there any systems that have the intelligence of looking at a picture and knowing that, for example, it's speech, and they would automatically tag it with that word, or do you have to manually go through the file yourself and decide what's relevant?
Depends on your platform. I believe Flickr does have image recognition where it can tag, and Google as well.
They're not great though.
Yeah.
It's taken us 3 months to have everything.
Exactly. So, facial recognition is a big thing that's coming out now. So similar to what you have on Facebook, can that be applied to a dam? Of course, it's just very, very, very expensive compared to the labor and the effort that goes into actually tagging. I would say to stress overall consistency whenever you're working with tagging. So whenever you start going into a non-defined space of automation, and that's something where you're not pulling the information from a database, but you're letting a computer decide how to tag your images, is where you kind of start running into risk.
Hi, I'm working with SmugBook now, and we are doing a lot of tagging, and at some point later this summer, I'm going to introduce the database to my coworkers and let them know it's their turn now to go in and find things. And obviously there'll be training, but my big concern is recognizing that we will need to tweak things and that it's not going to be easy and necessarily super intuitive right away. Eventually, I don't want them contacting me all the time and asking me to do things. So,
Exactly.
I was wondering if you have any tips or strategies for, especially in the beginning, I don't know, maybe having like a 3-month period where it's like, yes, we will do this, and then you're on your own, or any tips in general for guiding people and then saying like, this is an independent thing that I do not want to respond to all the time.
Absolutely. I think putting a time frame is a very reasonable way to go about it. It may or may not be realistic, because you could say 3 months and maybe find 2.5 months in that there's something that you really do need to be involved for and you want to continue assessing. But just really setting up that expectation first is a good way to go about it. The concept of your stakeholder versus your ambassador is that your ambassador is going to be that person that's going to take a little bit of the load off for you within every different department or every different application. So really making clear from the get-go that this is an assignment, you're a point person, this is an actual responsibility to be able to kind of disseminate the workload is an excellent way to go about it as well. But really from a more natural standpoint and not so much of a policy standpoint, I would say ask leading questions more than showing people how to do it or demonstrating. Say, well, how would you think that you needed to do this? Really start kind of getting into the psychology of it and their behavior as they're working with the product. They'll start to answer things for themselves. And there's also a very, very fine line, a balance between responsiveness and support, which you want to be behind your product, you want to be there, you want to be able to answer questions quickly. But if you're responding a little too quickly sometimes, it doesn't give people the chance to figure it out on their own. So that's a case by case, and sometimes it's a person by person basis where you know that maybe you need to give it a couple of minutes before you're responding, and the staff member can naturally come to that point on their own accord. So, thank you. How about black shirt? Yes.
Flickr has a slug line. I've been going back and forth. I've been using Flickr. My fear about these free services, not only how long they'll be free, but I'm worried about the privacy aspect.
Yep.
You know, people are saying, can you sell it? Somebody else will change the settings. You don't know when the settings are being changed. You know, so to try to stay with one long term, thinking about how secure are your digital assets there, and after we invest in it, because I had quite a few years of loading all these images, it's a constant worry.
Yeah, it absolutely is, and especially because the market is changing so rapidly. So many more players are coming out, companies fold, and the terms and services agreements, especially whenever you're getting into free tools, you could be giving up a lot of your power over your own assets. I think that as opposed to going into different platforms and the nuances there, really thinking about maybe those not being a lifetime place for your assets to go. How are your assets protected otherwise? Is it by the file naming conventions that you're using? Is it by your tags actually being embedded directly on the image instead of through a wrapper as you would have in Flickr or SmugMug? You know, taking those general precautions, just so that you know if you do need to pull them out someday and put them somewhere else, you don't have to reinvent the wheel over and over again. Unfortunately, it's kind of a case-by-case situation, so if you wanted to chat specifically about what you're experiencing, I'm more than happy to get into it a little bit further afterward. Yes?
I actually have questions related to...
Sorry.
Please go ahead.
Sorry.
Me? Oh,
Yes, you had a
thanks
question,
very
right?
much. I have a question about two capabilities. One is back to licensing and whether any of the market out there handles relicensing or distribution. So if you have 3 users within the organization who have different uses, you have a 5-use limit and 3 people check it out and you see they have 2 left, or it's expired and someone wants it. Will it go relicense or send an email to the licensing person?
Yeah, you can set up, a lot of DAMs will have the ability to have that level of customization to it, keeping in mind that the more custom a system gets, a little more locked in you are to it, a little more expensive it gets as well. But, you know, there are systems that I'm familiar with, for example, that you can export the analytics, how many times has this been downloaded. Now, it may not necessarily alert your user that after the 5 times it's been downloaded, it's no longer available. Maybe there are products out there, you know, there's so many of them, I'm not sure that's part of the discovery process for you. But can you export those analytics and have somebody just kind of keeping an eye on things? You know, how often are particular images getting downloaded, and does it make sense to change your rights and usage agreement to be more all-encompassing as opposed to a limitation of only so many uses? So,
If I can squeeze in the other question quickly, it's whether there, with many people inputting assets, whether there are any special deduping tips for this particular type of database.
Yeah. If the assets that are being put in place initially will have the same file name, and that depends on your policies and your naming conventions and how you're actually receiving them. There are systems out there that will read that there are 2 of the exact same file name within the system and will alert you of it. The deduping practice, I would say more generally should be done on an audit basis. So really taking a couple of days a year, a couple of days a quarter, and looking into what are my tags, how am I getting this information out, and then just manually making sure that everything's consistent is the most reliable way to do so. Yep.
I actually had a question on, but it might be a bit too specific on Flickr actually. You mentioned it's not in the IPTC or in the EXIF data. Is there any way in which you can get the metadata or the text out of Flickr and get it into another system?
Yeah, great question. Flickr specifically, I'm not 100% sure, but what I can speak to is Box. If you guys are familiar with that, we use Box. The metadata is on a wrapper there. It's API development, so API is a language that allows you to connect two systems, one to another. There's also a concept of IPTC mapping. So if something is in a wrapper, can you map that information into an embedded IPTC field later? Likewise, if you have your assets in a DAM as a wrapper and you need to take them out, are you able to actually get your assets out of that particular DAM while retaining the wrapper information without using API development? So. Any other questions? Yes?
Are there metrics somewhere about the initial phase where you're telling your management, well, it's going to take, for these kinds of assets, this many gigs, this kind of the timeline that you can let them know that this is going to take, well, it's going to take 3 months. No, we can't just have interns tagging because that's not a good idea.
Great point.
Those kinds of best practices to tell senior management as you're looking at doing this kind of thing.
Putting a test in is really dependent on systems and the level of effort that needs to go into putting an asset within a system. But running micro tests and saying, how long does it take me to do 50 of these? And then multiplying it by your full library and taking into kind of a percentage buffer of, okay, if everything worked perfectly with these 50 assets and it took me an hour to do it, and I have 10,000 assets to do this to, what's your calculation there? But then what if you do run into a problem? So kind of anticipating, well, it may take, always add an extra 20% or a little bit more to really give yourself that wiggle room. So if you do run into the problems, you're not missing deadlines or you're missing your mark whenever it comes to the senior management. Yes?
Hi, Lauren.
Hi.
I have a question about different types of media that get put into these systems. So when I think about, so I work at an educational nonprofit and we have a mix of photos and video and audio, and we have tons of B-roll in terms of video, and so when we're thinking about things to put into this storage system, of course we want the final product that's the best. The budget is always a concern, but what do you do with all this extra stuff, like all this background video, film, photos of people have close eyes, but then you might use them in the future. Like, how do you assess what's doing a lot of stuff besides using all these external hard drives?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. There's a couple ways to go about addressing it. If we're talking specifically video, some systems can support tagging or time stamping along the duration of it. So if within an hour's worth of video, you have a 30-second clip of something that needs repurposed, look for that as a requirement when you're selecting a system, if that's a need. But I think to answer your question a little bit more in the behavioral practices is what are your policies with your staff going to be? So as opposed to mandating tagging and entry that may never actually get used, is it possible to have an occurrence or a relationship with your staff where they tag on an as-needed basis? How often are they tapping into certain things? What are your kind of overarching tagging needs whenever you first initially receive that asset? And how do you choose words or a taxonomy in a way that will lead your staff to know to dig a little bit deeper in a particular area?
What's the price range for some of these DAM systems beyond Flickr, 3Ds?
Yeah, you know, the one that gentleman over here mentioned, I believe he said it was about 60 to 100 a month. As another similar product that I know a lot of nonprofit organizations and educational institutions use is one called WebDAM. It's subscription based. I think that's around, depending on how many users, because that's often what your licensing model is based off of. It could be for a small organization in the neighborhood of a couple $1,000s annually as far as an operating expense. You get into more sophisticated systems, you could be looking at several tens of thousands of dollars, well over $100,000. The cost of the product itself is definitely something that can get a little misconstrued, because if you're spending a lot of time and effort and research into procuring that product, you know, your man hours count too. So really thinking about, as you're going through the discovery process, what those all-encompassing costs are will help guide you in terms of the budget with the actual product that you're going to work forward with. Question?
This is somewhere between a question and a comment. I mean, a lot of people here said they were in the discovery stage. So at our organization, we actually were on Flickr for about 9 years, and about a year and a half ago realized we've now grown it and we're moving forward on one platform. And at that time, I used a tool. There was a database somebody developed that was on the NTEN listserv that listed about 60 different DAM providers, and that was a great help to try to filter some of the options that are out there. And I know you're seeing there's like 300 options.
Yeah,
so,
there's more every day.
Speaking, you know, we're halfway through that 2-year process of implementing it, and almost every day I'm like, did I make the right choice? I don't know. So maybe for future project or other work that NTEN could support would be just kind of more support and more tools to help people with that kind of choices matrix to figure out which tool is the right match for their organization.
Yeah, there are a couple of good resources I can point you to that do product assessments and will actually rank products on a quarterly or an annual basis. One of those is realstory.com, and the other one that comes to mind is Forrest and Gartner. Forrest and Gartner hits a lot of things, not just DAM. Real Story is a little bit more in tune to this industry and in tune to this market. The reports do cost a good chunk of money up front, but if you subscribe to their website, you check out their blog, they'll release that information in snippets. Another way to go about it would be a lot of vendors will pay for the licensing for the report that they've been included in and offer a free download on their website of that full report if you put in your email address, and that opens you up to solicitation and marketing and all of that, which can be not desirable at some points, but look and see if different vendors have that posted. If you're not particularly interested in them, and this would be the more high level or the more expensive players that will do this, but at least you have access to those reports after the fact. And then really just stressing that this industry has been around for about 15 to 20 years in a formal respect, but it really has only just taken off very heavily within the last 3 to 5. And it's very uncharted territory. There are a lot of folks out there that are dedicated to being thought leaders around what does this mean and how does this impact from an anthropological perspective our society going forward. So, you know, being in tune with the conversation that's out there. You know, I can tweet some things. I'm sure I've tweeted some things in the past that would be interesting reads in that regard. But just knowing that nothing's permanent, nothing's going to be your end-all solution. And sometimes if you're getting a DAM, it's okay to say, we're probably gonna have to rip this out in 3 years or 5 years. How do we anticipate that it may change in that period of time? And what can our next steps be? And how do we protect ourselves? Great. Any other questions? Great. All right. I think I'll turn you guys loose. Thank you. Those were great. Thank you.